Hello, and welcome to the Global Leadership Podcast, where leaders of all sorts come to grow and expand their influence in healthy and holistic ways, because we know when the leader gets better, everyone wins. I am Whitney Putnam, the host of Season 8 podcast here at the GLN, and we are so glad that you are joining us. This month, we are talking all about communication. And we know communication is extremely vital to developing as leaders. And so we are jumping in. If you have not yet gotten to listen, in this month, we've already gotten to talk with Raphael McManus, and he shares all about his 7 frequencies of communication. We also get to have a chat with David Ashcraft, our CEO and president of the Global Leadership Network. So make sure to go check out this month's episode all about communication so that we can all get better in how we actually communicate what we're learning. I am Whitney Putnam. It is truly my joy to get to serve as podcast host for this season and get to walk alongside us. Listen, this conversation is really special because our guest has harnessed this superpower that actually we all have. In fact, she actually shares with us that it's a superpower that is so unique to humans that it has gotten us from the very beginning to where we are today. Are you ready to know what the superpower is? It's storytelling. And this has truly been the actual foundation of humanity from the very, very beginning. And today we get to enter into a conversation with storytelling expert Kindra Hall. So we actually get to have a conversation. We get to see a conversation between Hermann, the executive producer at the Global Leadership Summit, interview Kindra Hall at the 2024 Summit. So if you don't know Kindra, here's just a little bit about her. She inspires teams and individuals to better communicate the value of their company, their products, and individuality through strategic storytelling. She's a best-selling author. She's the former chief storytelling officer at Success Magazine. She is the go-to expert for storytelling in business and beyond. She also has a brand new book called The Story Edge: How Leaders Harness the Power of Stories to Win in Business. This helps leaders to better communicate with and inspire their teams and organizations. It is incredible. Not only has Kindra just released a new book, she also helps shape the stories of global brands that we know and probably love: Target, Univision, United Way, USO, and Farmers Insurance. So we are going to get to lean in to this conversation where Kindra gives us an actual framework that will set you free from self-limiting stories that even leaders, yes, you and I, can fall into self-limiting beliefs. She gives us a framework to walk through those self-limiting beliefs, and then what to do even too if we see people on our team, and I would even say people we're in relationship with, struggling with their own self-limiting stories. So I can't wait to dive into this conversation where you're going to get to hear this unique superpower that we all hold, have Kindra lead us and direct us through the framework. Before we do that, we absolutely love when you like, rate, and subscribe to this podcast. It is a way that we get to get leadership content out to so many people. So thanks so much for sharing and subscribing and rating. We love it when you leave a 5-star review, and we love it even more when you tell us what you're learning. That's what gets us so excited. So let's go ahead and learn from Kindra with this conversation that she and Lori get to have.
Kindra, I'm so excited. Thank you for being here on the Global Leadership Podcast. You are a story expert. Can you tell us why stories have so much power?
There's how much time do we have?
Probably not enough.
No. I think if I were to put it most simply, and it's the thing that I think that's the problem, is it is so simple, but humans were, from the very beginning of time, stories have been our evolutionary edge. Like the zebra has its stripes, the scorpion has its venom. Humans have been sharing stories, and they've allowed us to communicate with each other and connect with each other and paint pictures of things that we don't necessarily see right in front of us. They inform us about who we are and where we fit in. And so I think back to your question about why are they so powerful? It's like the original human currency.
Yeah. And so much of our story, we have an inner story that I think we tell ourselves too. And as leaders, I think sometimes that can be helpful or kind of destructive. So how do you have a way of thinking about that inner voice and that inner story that you tell us? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, just as we were, created to share stories with one another at the same time, we started sharing stories with ourselves. We started sharing stories with ourselves, about ourselves, um, collecting experiences that we've had and curating them to shape and inform our belief in ourselves and the next actions that we should take. So we use these stories to keep ourselves safe. We have to forgive ourselves for that. But the other dark side of the self stories is it is as automatic, this self storytelling, as the breath in our lungs. It's as automatic as the blood that goes through our veins. And so we don't think about it. So we don't even know that it's based on these stories that we're making decisions about the actions that we do or don't take, which then ultimately shape the lives that we do or do not have.
What are some ways that we can identify that maybe the story we're telling ourselves isn't accurate? What are some strategies? Do you have any strategies for how to change that inner voice?
Yeah, I think that there's actually a whole system. Actually, just whole system makes it sound more complicated than it is, but it's more like a four-step process. Um, I think the even before we get into that process is one of the ways that you can tell. The first step is catching these stories in the act, and another way to think about these are limiting beliefs. And they can be big and broad. They can be I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't have enough experience, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not tall enough, I'm not short enough, I'm not there. Enough comes up a lot, but any of these or any of those automatic responses. For example, back when my husband and I were first just dating, he suggested, or he came to me and said, "Hey, we're going to go on a ski trip with a bunch of his friends, like a bunch of couples were going." He was so excited. And I said, "I don't ski." And he said, How, how do you know you don't ski? Like I did. And I said, well, no, I don't ski. And he's like, why don't you ski? And it was an automatic answer without like it was completely automatic. I don't ski. Now think about that. I'm keeping myself safe. And so it's catching those limiting beliefs, those automatic statements is really the first step to be like, where is this coming from?
Well, and in that case, your husband helped you.
Well, exactly. And
How hard is it to catch yourself?
exactly. And that's one of the because it can be so much easier. It's so much easier to see someone else's stories and the stories that are holding them back. And and how fortunate we are when we have people in our lives who love us enough and are brave enough to challenge those because we protect those stories. We are like, this is our like again, it's like stay back. This is my survival mechanism. So how fortunate when we have other people, but if we can't always it's not someone else's job. This is the epitome of self work and being able to identify your own stories. So the first step really is catching it when it happens. And if you think about them as limiting beliefs or any of those things where you're like, no, I don't do that, I can't do that, and maybe you feel kind of bad about yourself, or sometimes you can catch it when you're in one of those spirals, right? Where it's just nothing ever works. How am I ever going to, and you just go down and down. That's when you say, there might be some stories here. Which then is the second step, which is kind of analyze where this is coming from, what these stories are. So in the example with my husband, and this is long before I wrote the book about our self stories, he's like, where is this coming from? And so I actually wondered, and I remembered that when I was in 4th grade, we had a field trip. I grew up in Minnesota, and so lots of snow, lots of opportunities for skiing. And we had a skiing field trip, and my dad was going to chaperone it. The one and only time my dad ever chaperoned a trip. And so he went on the bus. He was, we get there, we put on the ski pants, we do everything. And my dad and I just weren't meant to, he was not meant to teach me to ski. Like it just wasn't, we had a terrible, I don't know if he expected, I think he forgot.
Does he ski?
He skis.
Oh, he
And
does.
he'd always skied. So he was like a net. And so I'm like terrified of the tow rope. And he's like, come on, let's go get on the chairlift. Right. It was a comedy of errors. He had a miserable time. I had a miserable time. Like it was like field trip gone wrong. But as I tell you this story right now, it's funny. Like imagine this whole like dad, daughter skiing. It was just a terrible situation. And yet somehow my brain took that and said, you don't ski. You can't ski. You shouldn't ski. Never put on a ski again or two in your life. It was like, I talk about it as like an iceberg, right? So we have we can sometimes identify our limiting beliefs. And that's the tip of the iceberg, right? It's right above the surface level of our consciousness. But then in that analyze step, you have to go deeper because the mass of an iceberg, 90% is under the water. You can't see it. That's what took the Titanic down. And so in our metaphoric icebergs are all these little stories. And sometimes all it takes is one bad field trip. And this perfectly preserved, like I remember the bus ride. I remember being on the chairlift and like throwing myself off and feeling like I'm tumbling down, like taking my skis off and like I can see it all as if I were
traumatic.
It was, I'm also a very dramatic person, but it was crystallized in my memory. And it was that one story that kept me from ever skiing again. So here I am with so that's the exercise that's the second step. You catch it and then you analyze it and see, and you will be shocked at what stories live inside you, what stories you're carrying around with you. I had, I took a group of participants through this process as I was studying and researching this and putting the book together. And the stories that they found in their proverbial icebergs they couldn't believe it. That one girl really struggled with perfection and couldn't figure out why, and she's not a girl anymore. She's a woman. She's trying to work at her job and she's terrified to put her hand up for new projects. It's holding her back in her career because she feels like she has to be perfect. And so now she identifies this as a limiting belief. She went back to analyze some of where these stories are coming from. She found a story when she was in elementary school, middle school at some point, came home, was so excited with a math test, and showed it to her dad, who was sitting in the chair that he always sat in, and said, look I only got one wrong. And she was so excited. And he said, why did you get that one wrong? Now, there's but here's a story that she could remember clear as day. And so if she's wondering why she has an issue with perfectionism, well, there's one of the stories. And there's so many I encourage people to take a moment, look back and be like, wow, where is this coming from? And you will be shocked at what is living fully preserved and then projected back to you as your inner storyteller.
So once you've analyzed it, then what?
This is where it gets really exciting because I think we believe that we're already written in stone in a way, that our past does predict our future and we can't go back and change it. So then that we're destined for this. This is our lot. to carry. And it's true, you can't change the stories that you've lived. You can't change the ways that people have wronged you, or the regrets that you have, or the mistakes that you've made, or whatever it is. Um, However, and this is the next step in the process, we can, if we play stories back to ourselves, and those stories dictate what action we take, because they shape our beliefs. Like, well, I can do this, I can't do this. And we know that we naturally have negative stories, and that is on automation what our body is going to choose because it's trying to keep us safe. But we're not 700,000 years old. Like, we've grown.
Right.
And now we have the ability to choose which stories we tell ourselves, because just as there are negative stories within us, there are also positive stories as well. And if you can, once you catch that limiting belief, you analyze just for your own information, like, I can't believe, then it is time for you to take back control of the automation, to put it in manual mode and say, I am now going to choose, I'm going to go back again and look at my history and find what stories I can tell myself that show that I do have what it takes. That maybe I'm inexperienced, but in this particular area, but I have experience over here, and this experience counts for something. Like, oh, here's the time that I took a risk, but it paid off for me. And that, again, that comes back, that is our responsibility then, to stop and say, wait, what stories can I choose to tell myself that are true? I mean, you're not making it up, because those options are within you as well.
I love the formula. It really is a simple thing to step yourself through. When you get to the point where you've recognized all that and you have to install a new story, what are some ways that you can like do that and really get rid of some of those old soundtracks or that?
Yeah, they're always good. The old ones are always going to be there. Like, they're a part of you. They're part of your iceberg. So now it is finding some very specific ones that serve whatever belief you're trying to take down. And then being very specific about the times then that you retell those stories to yourself. And the question that I often get asked is, okay, so my limiting belief is that I can't be successful, because like at my job, I can't be a successful leader because I've never led anybody before. This is the first time I'm trying to lead somebody. And so what am I? And I don't have any old stories of when I led someone. So what I recommend in that situation is, we're not looking for literal carbon copies of the thing you're trying to do and to prove that you've done it in the past. It can be, maybe you did live, maybe you were on student council as a kid and you had to get a dance together and you pulled all the pieces together for that. That was a leadership role. Maybe it was within your church community, or maybe you're the oldest sibling, or maybe you're the youngest sibling, but you were still the one that had to like get the kids all together and going in a certain direction. So you can find those stories that are similar to the limiting belief that you have, that prove the opposite of the limiting belief. So, oh, I've led these people in this realm, so I could lead people in this realm. Another option is, let's talk about that leadership example again. If you're thinking, oh, I've never led anyone before, I don't know how to lead someone, it's what are some of the qualities that you know a leader needs to have? So maybe one is good listening skills. You say, well, I'm a good listener. And then go back and think of, like, gosh, I'm just thinking. So, and then as you do this, you start thinking, I'm thinking about when I was in high school, and there was this, well, I tell a lot of boy stories now that I realize it. I don't know why. There's this boy that I was like, I was like, oh my gosh, I love him. I was a sophomore. He was a junior. And then we like were at something, and he met my neighbor, who was also my best friend, who was a year younger than me, and instantly fell in love with her. And then he called me every night, would sit there on the phone and talk and talk. And we didn't have call waiting. We didn't have about this girl for hours and hours and hours. And I would just sit there and have to listen. At this point, I didn't like him anymore. But that would be an example of like, I would listen. I would try to help him. So I could use that as no, I know how to listen, right? Or what's another quality that a leader needs to have? And where or when have you exhibited that? A story of when you've exhibited that in the past. And you can use those. And then, keep an eye out for when I mean, I've been talking in work situations, but sometimes it's family dynamics. And there are people in your family who, for whatever reason, bring out the parts of yourself that you're really trying to work on or that make you feel smaller than. So if you know that you're all getting together for Mother's Day or whatever it is, in the car ride to the gathering, be ready with the positive stories that you can tell yourself so that you can come into that space primed, ready, as strong as you can be. And then when you leave, retell yourself those stories again.
Do you have any, I'm hearing you say a lot of times, prepare yourself with a story. Like what are some strategies that you have? Or is that just a philosophy that you have, is to think through stories and have them in your back pocket? Say more about the preparation that you're talking about with having the right stories in your mind. And
I love that question. So once you've identified like what your limiting belief is, once you know when that's going to show up, once you can feel your fear that you have, and you've found a few stories that you can tell yourself to combat that, to stop the spiral from you being like, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't, that makes you miserable. You have a few stories. Hang on to them, like have them in your back pocket, have them and told in such a way that you can see it as clearly as if someone's reading it to you in a storybook. And you're like, you can think that you can use stories from your past. You can also identify stories that are happening to you right now and be like, this is an example of this incredible quality that I have. So, I mean, I like to tell stories. So I recently, last year, I was in a bad place. I was trying to write my third book. Maybe I shouldn't even tell you. But I was trying to write my third book, and it was not the book about the self stories. It was the one after that, and I just couldn't do it. Like it wasn't coming together. I couldn't figure out how I wanted it all to, and it'd been going on for months, and I was on a deadline. Like I have a I need to hand in drafts. They need words on pages, and I was struggling and I was starting to freak out a little bit. And I was finding myself going into the spiral of like, this is the thing that I'm good at. What am I going to do? This is the thing I'm supposed to be able to do. It was really bad. And I was paralyzed, writer's block beyond anything. And so I decided in that moment that what I needed to do was something I had no business doing. And so it just so happened that was I remember it coming down to this like terrible day. And I was like, all right, I either need to call my agent and say, return the advance, this book isn't happening, or I need to figure something out, do something drastic. And it was the day that you could sign up to run the New York City Marathon with a charity partner. Now, I say this, so a marathon. So I'm like, that's what I'll do. I'll run a marathon. Now
that's a good story.
Well, so that's but I'd literally run in the 2 years prior. I had run a total of 20 miles, and over the course of 2 years. So now I'm suddenly going to run a marathon. So I signed up, and I was like, well, I guess we're going to see how this goes. So I went through the whole training process, and actually, it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. And then I ran the marathon. It was. My kids get mad when I say this because they're like, but what about the day I was born? And I'm like, that was about you. The marathon was the best day of my life. Like it was all about like what I had done. Okay, so this marathon happens. But now I have a story, and it doesn't have to be that bad. You don't have to sign up for a marathon. But my story is like when I get afraid to do new things. I like to do the things I know how to do. It makes me feel good. You know,
most of us.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Like I don't want to do things I don't know how to do. I'm good at enough things that pay the bills, whatever. I want to do those things. But there are times when you're called to do something new. I pulled back from that. And now I have this story of I had no business running a marathon. I did it. I did way better than I thought I ever could. And so now I can see myself at that last, 0.2 miles just yelling, yes, yes, yes. And I visualize that whenever I'm afraid to do something new, because what if I try this new thing and it's as awesome as the marathon was? So when you see moments in your life.
So running that marathon made you say, hey, I can finish this
Yeah,
book.
so now I have this, and then I finished the book. And
did
then
hard
so I have
things.
this, it's kind of like I can do hard things. But that's a cute phrase to put on a mug. But like I don't look at a coffee mug and say, I can do hard things. That's like when you hear affirmations, which are important, but if you don't have the visceral emotion and visual imagery like you have of, the ski mountain with my dad, I don't get that from looking at a quote on a coffee mug in the morning. I need the story. You need the story. So when you see one of those stories happening, to collect it, to be like, okay, so the next time I'm like, I can't do a hard thing, or that's a new thing that I don't want to do. I have this story that I can tell myself.
I ran the marathon.
Yeah.
I've written 3 books.
Right.
So you were talking about leading, wondering if you could lead a team or doubting that you could lead a team. For those of us who are leading and leading teams, when we see people having negative stories, that how do we as a leader, when we identify that in somebody else, how can we help coach someone?
Oh, I love that question. Okay, let me start by saying the thing you cannot do. Well, first, the thing you should do is have everybody get the book, Choose Your Story, Change Your Life, because then they'll have. But then what you cannot do is say to someone, what story are you telling yourself? Or don't you think you should change that story? Because this is very personal, and it could be and this is again a survival mechanism. You will do more damage than good if you approach it in that way. So only point that out if it's in a conversation where they are obviously open to it. It can't be used as a weapon. I had someone say that to me. What story are you telling yourself right now? And I'm like, stop it. This is bad. You can't do that. Then what you can do, and what you absolutely should do, is if you can figure out what exactly that limiting belief is that they have, or even if you can get in the general vicinity of it, you should tell back to them stories about themselves. So
Oh, that's
moments
great.
when you've seen, say, remember that project that nobody wanted to take on because it was just too
That's so
tedious,
good.
it was too da da da. And I remember, and then the art of telling a story becomes really important, because you can't just allude to it. You can't say, remember that time there was that project no one wanted to do, but you did it? That's what's great about you. Because that's the same as, you can do hard things on a mug. That's not going to do anything. So instead, what you're going to say is, do you remember that project that nobody wanted to do? And you took it on. I remember the day we were all in a meeting and I said, who's going to take on this project? And everyone looked around, everyone looked down, nobody wanted to do it. And I feel like I saw you take a breath or make a decision, and you said, I'll do it. And I remember thinking, there's something there. And then I watched you as you da 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 da. So like, describe the actual moment through your eyes as a leader, because they have definitely forgotten that moment. So whether it's a big story, whether it's a small story, you could even say, I saw the other day when so and so was struggling with someone, and I know you have a lot on your plate, but you took the time to help them through it, to add some perspective or your guidance or give them the knowledge that they needed. And I want you to know that that is a really important quality to have. And I saw it in you, and I hope you see it in yourself. Like, just equip them with those moments and keep telling them back. And eventually they will start telling those. And you have no idea the impact one of those the experience of being seen and having your story told to you is one of the most beautiful moments as a human, right? That's what we're all questioning, whether or not we matter, or what the meaning is. And to have someone literally tell it right back to you, what a gift to be able to do. So as a leader, make sure like your job now becomes you need to be looking for the stories. You need to be looking for their limiting beliefs and the stories that you can tell them. And again, they can be small, and they'll start telling those stories to themselves.
I love it. It's almost like your formula working in a different way.
Yep.
As a leader, I am going to catch the person and at what they're doing and catch their story. I'm going to analyze it and see how it fits and could serve them and then help install
And you're
it
going
back
to
into
give,
them.
you're going to choose the story for them. Like I am choosing to tell them this story, and then you're giving it to them and installing it in them. And the other, it's interesting too, because that analyze step, and this goes into some of the things that I talk about in the story edge, is you don't know. You may not know what all of their stories are. You don't know the stories in their iceberg of why they behave this way and why they shy away from this or act aggressively in this way. All you know is that there are stories there. And that may or may not be your business. They may or may not want to tell you what they are. When you're doing this process for someone, you don't have to worry about that. All you have to do is steps 1, 3, and 4.
Well, I know that's in your next book is There's Always a Story.
Yes, there is always a story. Yep, that's in the story edge. That's one thing. There is always a story, and you may not ever know what it is, but knowing that there is one, I think it's a lost art to be like, I feel like there's a story there, and I don't know all of it. So I'm going to wait and see if I can figure out what the rest of this story is, right? Yeah.
Tell us about the new book because it's done now.
It's
right?
done. It's out.
Great. Tell us about that.
Great. People like it, so that's good. The newest book is called The Story Edge, and it goes back to where our discussion started. It's all about how leaders can use storytelling to inspire teams, to express empathy, which all these they're called like soft skills, but they're kind of the most essential skills that there are, and they aren't often taught. And because we are storytelling creatures by nature, by leaning into the importance of story and being curious enough to hear somebody's story and willing to suspend judgment until you can understand more fully what a story might be. All very important skills, strategies for leaders to use.
Completely. So how can we stay connected to you? Keep following you.
I'm on social media, not TikTok. I can't. But I'm on Instagram. You can find me on Instagram, at Facebook. My website is kindrahall.com. I send out weekly storytelling videos for strategies for people who want to be better at telling stories, whether to others or for themselves. So that's kindrahall.com. Those are the best spots.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. It's been so great to have you.
So happy to do it. It's such an honor. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
I loved that conversation with Kindra and Lori. First of all, I love listening to all of Kindra's stories, which actually just proves the superpower that she's talking about. I'll be thinking about her stories for quite some time. And I also will be thinking about how she actually is correlating how the power of stories can help with our own self-limiting beliefs. And we said it at the very beginning of this podcast, but I'm also just going to say it again. You're not alone as a leader if you have self-limiting beliefs. I know that I certainly do. Gosh, I know they come up sometimes even when I'm about to walk into a meeting and I wonder, well, what good do I have to bring to this meeting? Or should I be here? Or I have self-limiting beliefs in motherhood. I mean, I could go on, and I'm sure that you and I have them as well. You know, the thing that I loved most that Kindra was talking about in her framework was not only do we need to actually recognize the self-limiting beliefs, but we actually need to be preparing ourselves once we recognize what the self-limiting belief is. And so I've started really thinking about, okay, Whitney, when that negative story comes up in my own mind, how am I going to begin to prepare myself with what is actually true? And so I'm already starting to do the work of that in my own life. And I just want to invite you into doing the same, which really means we have to recognize the self-limiting belief and then start reminding us of some stories that we can tell ourselves about what is actually true. I also know that's not even just alone in my own life. I know that I'm walking alongside people I know and love, and my family and friendships and coworkers that I can practice this with. So I'm so grateful for Kindra's framework so that we can begin to actually show up as the unique humans with the unique giftings that we have. And so I hope that you get to begin to think about that and process through that a little bit more as well. And listen, Kindra is an expert on communication. And as you know, this season, this month, we are talking about communication. And one thing that we are really passionate about at the GLN is making sure you as a leader feel like you can be as effective as possible. And so that's why we created our 365 resources so that you can continue to develop as a leader right where you are, when you are. And so make sure to check out our 365 resources. You can go to globalleadership.org/365. And guess what? When you subscribe this month, we are talking all about communication. So if you want to do a deeper dive and if you want to explore a little bit more and go back into some GLS talks that we have historically about communication, make sure to go check out those products. You guys, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that this episode propels you forward as a leader. Thanks for being a part of this community. We love it when you like, rate, and subscribe to this podcast. It's so fun to see how this community and this information is developing you as a leader. And just remember, everyone has influence, so lead where you are.